Chapter 70. Li Hongyuan didn't sleep for too long. He woke up in less than 2 hours, but his body was wet and smelled of alcohol. He didn't feel very good. He quickly took off his clothes. Eunuch Mu, who was very considerate, asked someone to bring in the bathtub at the right time. The temperature of the bathtub was neither too hot nor too cold. It was just right. After cleaning up, it was already an hour later. Naturally, it was already past lunchtime. However, even if the monks in the monastery were strict with themselves and did not eat past lunchtime, who was Li Hongyuan? If anyone was hungry, he would also be hungry. Not to mention missing lunchtime, even if it was in the middle of the night, they would still think of ways to feed him until he was full. Considering that he was sober and couldn't eat greasy food, they didn't need to waste time to prepare food for him outside. They could directly use the kitchen in the temple. Seeing that they were almost done, Eunuch Mu asked the kitchen to start a fire to cook. When he sat down, the hot vegetarian dishes that looked and smelled good were just on the table. Li Hongyuan had a small bowl of clear soup next to his hand, but it emitted a faint fragrance. What is it? It's the hangover soup specially made for Prince according to the abbot's recipe, said the grey-robed monk who delivered the food. Should I say that he's worthy of being called Master Liaochen? He even knows about this kind of thing, said Li Hongyuan sarcastically. The monk didn't refute. After setting the food, he bowed and left. Li Hongyuan naturally ate a lot of vegetarian dishes in White Dragon Temple. In fact, compared to meat dishes, he preferred light dishes. Now, these dishes were just to his taste. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Li Hongyuan went to the back mountain peach forest to digest the food. Eunuch Mu stood far away from the peach forest. At this time, he was naturally an idiot who didn't know what to do. However, these exceptionally beautiful peach blossoms would probably be destroyed after Miss Luo left. Previously, he had been wondering if his master was not preparing to make peach blossom wine this year. Only after these 2 days did he realize that his master had probably planned to let Miss Luo have a good time before picking flowers to make the wine when he found out that Miss Luo had entered the capital. Li Hongyuan plucked a peach blossom and pulled out the petals in boredom. However, for a man with impeccable looks like him, doing this kind of thing was also pleasing to the eye. After all, under another peach tree not far away, there was someone who was mesmerized by him. After Li Hongyuan finished plucking the peach blossom in his hand, he turned his head to look at her. Even though the other party was a first-class beauty, his expression was still cold, and he was even more displeased at being disturbed. Eunuch Mu had also noticed the woman. He cursed inwardly. How could he have let someone else in due to a moment of carelessness? No, the other party should have been inside for a long time. When Jin Qinhuang arrived at Bailong Temple, although he didn't completely clear the area, he was still of noble status. Fearing that someone would bump into him, he would still clear a small area wherever he went. Although this peach forest was very large, because the common people knew that noble people often appeared, once the area was cleared, they would consciously leave. Otherwise, if something happened, it might implicate the entire family. But now that this person had been bumped into by Li Hongyuan, it could only mean one thing. She deliberately avoided him. Especially after seeing the other party's appearance, Eunuch Mu was certain of his conjecture. Thinking about it, Eunuch Mu did not step forward. It was only because this woman's status was noble and his master's attitude towards her was quite ambiguous. The reason why he said this was because every time his master met this woman, although he still had the attitude of facing a woman who was not interested, he was still milder than other noble ladies. If he didn't know that his master had deep feelings for Miss Luo, Eunuch Mu would have thought that his master had taken a fancy to her. This woman's surname was Ruan, her maiden name was Fangfei. She was the youngest daughter of the Prime Minister of the Cabinet, Ruan Ruizhong. It must be known that Ruan Ruizhong was even older than Luo Peishan. It could be imagined that this was a proper birth of a daughter at an old age. Of course, because she was born from a second wife, it didn't cause any commotion. If a woman in her 50s gave birth to a pearl, it would be truly strange. After all, in the inner courtyards of high families, women over 40 basically no longer share a room with their husbands. If people found out, they would probably be said to be old, shameless, and jealous. Ruan Fangfei saw that Li Hongyuan was looking at her. The infatuation in her eyes disappeared. She didn't avoid him but leisurely stepped forward. This subject's daughter greets Wang Ye. Long live Wang Ye. Her eyes were like autumn water, full of tenderness that was about to overflow. In the morning, when concubine Li approached Li Hongyuan, how did he describe it? Of course, Ruan Fangfei was still a woman of the boudoir and naturally couldn't be said to be having an affair. However, in the eyes of Li Hongyuan, a man who couldn't tolerate a second woman, it was a different approach to achieve the same result. Ruan Fangfei admired Li Hongyuan. Not many people knew about this matter, but it definitely wasn't a small number. Especially in private, when she saw Li Hongyuan, she never concealed it. The woman who was usually like water was bold and passionate in front of him. She even said that she hoped that Li Hongyuan would marry her after she reached marriageable age. In the capital, Ruan Fangfei was a young lady who was as famous as Sun Yijia. It could be imagined that her talent and appearance were definitely of the highest quality. However, Sun Yijia was a cold and reserved woman, while Ruan Fangfei was more towards the gentle and charming side. At the same time, the two were the same age, but Ruan Fangfei was younger by 2 months. Why are you here? Li Hongyuan asked in a light voice. This subject's daughter knew that Wang Ye came to White Dragon Temple, so I followed. Ruan Fangfei stared at him without hiding anything. Ben Wang is asking why you are alone in the peach blossom forest. Ruan Fangfei smiled softly. Naturally, it's because it's easier to hide from the monks of the temple if I'm alone. Her eyes flashed with craftiness and a little pride. Is Wang Ye concerned about this subject's daughter? This subject's daughter knows that Wang Ye treats this subject's daughter differently from others. Li Hongyuan really wanted to ask, where did you come up with such a conclusion? When Ruan Fangfei was 7 or 8 years old, when she first met Li Hongyuan in the palace, she said that she wanted to marry him when she grew up. At that time, because she was still young, the elders made fun of her. Everyone else took it as a joke, but only Ruan Fangfei remembered it. As Li Hongyuan grew older, his reputation became worse and worse. The other noble ladies all avoided him, but she kept coming forward, trying to get close to him again and again. No matter how many things she heard about him, she never retreated. Last year, after Ruan Fangfei's hairpin ceremony, she asked Li Hongyuan again when he would marry her. Li Hongyuan was expressionless, saying that Ben Wang was not interested in her. Ruan Fangfei acted as if she didn't hear anything. She said that she didn't mind his bad temper, that she didn't mind him being a playboy. If he took a fancy to any beauty, no matter if it was a man or a woman, she was willing to help him get it. With her as a cover, he didn't even need to wrong himself to hug those women of low status. If he wanted the throne, she would also persuade her father, as long as he was willing to marry her. When she said this, she didn't beg in a humble manner, and didn't even have much emotional fluctuation. She just calmly stated a fact: the benefits he could get by marrying her. Some insiders felt that she was bold and even shameless, but at the same time, they felt that she was too lowly. Burying herself in the mud like this, even if she got what she wanted, what good would it be? However, Ruan Fangfei didn't feel that she was lowly, and neither did Li Hongyuan. In his eyes, she was a very strange person. Her thoughts seemed to be centered around Li Hongyuan, but because he wasn't affected by her at all, he didn't have the mentality of being blinded by the situation. He could see very clearly that Ruan Fangfei was really the most selfish person. In order to achieve her goal, she would do anything, and even abandon everything. This kind of person would only make people be on guard against her, or even afraid of her. Don't you know that Wang is a jinx to his wife? Ruan Fangfei looked at him with a gentler and sweeter gaze. She said, that's because our marriage is predestined by the heavens. Because this subject's daughter is young, the heavens naturally want to remove the obstacles between us. You see, even when His Majesty personally bestowed the marriage, the result was the same. Isn't that enough to explain the problem? Li Hongyuan laughed this time. The obstacles between him and Wan should be removed. As for who removed it? The heavens, Perhaps to show her sincerity, within 2 days, Wan Fangfei sent a beautiful woman to Li Hongyuan's bed. That was her niece, and she was about to be married. Just like that, she was knocked out, stripped naked, and sent to Li Hongyuan. If she didn't have full trust in her, how could she be so easily sent to Li Hongyuan's residence? The trust that others placed in her, this was how she repaid them. Had she ever thought about what would happen to her niece if she lost her chastity before marriage? Ruan Fangfei was an old fox among old foxes. Even Li Hongyuan praised her methods. Did she know that the daughter she cherished in the palm of her hand had such a terrifying side? Because she saw that Li Hongyuan was indifferent, Wan Fangfei began to undress herself and let her and her niece serve him together. How about it? Li Hongyuan was not surprised by her outrageous behavior because he had seen it in his previous life. At that time, she had just passed the age of 20. Because she was in the imperial family, she had a temperament that ordinary people could not compare to. However, she had not experienced real hardships, so she still retained a trace of innocence. Not only was he surprised, he was also somewhat frightened. Although it was a bit shameful, it was the truth. It was also because of this that he did not take Ruan Fangfei, this beauty, into his arms. It must be said that the difference between his reputation in his previous life and this life was not small. Ruan Fangfei had her eyes on him. This could be considered an ill-fated relationship. With a sentence of, "This prince likes reserved, dignified, and well-behaved women," Wan Fangfei might be as magnanimous as before in front of him, but her actions did not overstep the boundary. It showed that she was the most arrogant, most decent, most dignified, and most perfect noble lady. However, there was not the slightest bit of inconsistency on her body. Li Hongyuan swept his eyes over this woman who felt good about herself from head to toe. This could be considered a great honor for her. The clothes on her body were not delicate, the hair accessories were not ostentatious, and the makeup on her face was just right. Everything about her was close to the word dignified. However, the clothes that clearly did not belong to her age, she firmly controlled them. Even the most picky noblewoman in the capital would not be able to find the slightest flaw on her. Seeing his sizing up gaze, Wan Fangfei generously spread out her arms and twirled in front of him. Does it look good? Under the fluttering peach blossom petals, it was indeed exceptionally beautiful. However, Li Hongyuan, who was used to seeing beauties, was like a blind man at this moment, not seeing anything. If it wasn't for the fact that she still had some value, Li Hongyuan's patience with her would have already run out. It was actually very easy to ruin her. As long as he made public her words and deeds in front of him, Wan Fangfei would be completely finished without even polishing it. Perhaps it was because of this patience that Wan Fangfei always felt that Li Hongyuan had her in his heart. They would get married sooner or later, although her father did not agree with her marrying him, saying that he was not her ideal man. It didn't matter. She could slowly persuade her father. If 1 year was not enough, 2 years. If 2 years were not enough, 3 years. If 3 years were not enough, 10 years. She never thought that she would be old. Anyway, she would marry him in the end. He would always wait for her, wouldn't he? As for the ideal man, as long as she got what she wanted, what did it have to do with whether he was her ideal man or not? Sometimes, Ruan Fangfei couldn't help but wonder. You can leave now. Leave White Dragon Temple. I'll take my leave. Although reluctant, Ruan Fangfei did not disobey him. After leaving the peach blossom forest, she found her maid and walked further and further away. She returned to the place where she stayed before. Because she came in a hurry, her daily necessities were still on the way. She decisively got on the carriage and left White Dragon Temple. Eunuch Mu couldn't guess his master's mood now, so he didn't dare to go forward rashly. Li Hongyuan stood in the same place. He didn't know how long he had been standing there. Suddenly, he felt a little palpitating and reached out to cover his chest. What was going on? Since he came back, Li Hongyuan had been paying attention to his physical condition. He was very sure that his body was healthy without any disease or pain. Those who are affected by it are also connected to the heart. Li Hongyuan's face changed slightly, and he immediately turned around and left the peach blossom forest. Mu and send a pigeon to ask if something happened to Wan Wan. Eunuch Mu was stunned, but he didn't dare to neglect it. At this time, Miss Luo was the most important. His master had to be put aside. He turned around and rushed to the small courtyard where he lived temporarily regardless of his image. Not sure if something really happened to Jingwan, Li Hongyuan's face was gloomy. Because of his anxiety, he even arrived at the small courtyard one step ahead of Eunuch Mu. Although he was good at martial arts, his hair was still a little messy when he walked so fast, which had never happened to him before. Seeing that his master had passed him and walked ahead, Eunuch Mu could only speed up. It should be known that none of the maids around Li Hongyuan were weak. Even so, when Eunuch Mu rushed back, his face was pale and he was gasping for breath. Li Hongyuan had already prepared the writing brush and ink for himself. Seeing Eunuch Mu, he said, "Useless thing." Eunuch Mu couldn't help turning paler. His master never used useless things, but he didn't even dare to plead for mercy. He just tried his best to calm down and then went forward to serve the writing brush and ink, hoping to escape this time. Li Hongyuan wrote so fast that he didn't even care that the letter might fall into the hands of others. But fortunately, his handwriting was not like this. Compared with the fierce style of his writing now, what he wrote to outsiders could only be regarded as mediocre. Just as he finished writing and rolled it up, an E, who was dressed as a guard, hurried in from outside. "Master, Miss Luo fell off the cliff halfway up the mountain." Bang, with a loud noise, Li Hongyuan smashed the table. In a flash, he had already arrived in front of an E and grabbed his neck. "Speak clearly." An E felt suffocated, not only because his neck was grabbed, but also because of Li Hongyuan's eyes that could devour people. Master, Li Hongyuan threw him away. "Let's go." Forcibly suppressing his choking cough, he hurriedly followed Li Hongyuan's pace and spoke in detail while walking. "I don't know why, but Miss Luo, who originally planned to come to White Dragon Temple tomorrow, came to White Dragon Temple today. Elder Ruan's youngest legitimate daughter was riding a carriage down the mountain. Halfway up the mountain, a wild beast suddenly rushed out of the forest beside the road, startling the horse and causing it to lose control for a moment. Miss Luo and the others just happened to go up the mountain. The two sides collided, and the horses on that side were also startled. It happened to be the section near the cliff, and several carriages fell off the cliff together. And he paused. Wu Anho's heir and his wife were also traveling with Miss Luo. Li Hongyuan's footsteps paused. "Who are you talking about?" "Fu Yunting." And he couldn't help but take a step back. His master's expression was as if he wanted to eat Wu Anho's heir alive. His master's attitude towards Wu Anho's heir had always been bad, but no one knew the reason. Now it seemed that it was related to the future princess. Otherwise, why would his reaction be so big? Perhaps he was stung by Fu Yunting's appearance, but Li Hongyuan actually calmed down a bit. He rubbed between his eyebrows, making his chaotic thoughts a bit clearer, secretly assist the monks in the temple in saving people. Investigate why Wan came early and didn't send a message to Ben Wang, as well as whether the startling of the horse was an accident or man-made. Also, carry out the arrangements right now. In order to formally meet with Jingwan, Li Hongyuan painstakingly prepared a scheme of injuring himself to gain the enemy's confidence. He also put on a big play for those people in the capital to muddy the waters even more. Master, forgive this subordinate for speaking bluntly, but isn't it not too good to do this now? What if Miss Luo is seriously injured? Everything would be in vain. You'd better all beg for her to be unscathed. Li Hongyuan's starry eyes grew darker, brewing a madness that could swallow everything. And he originally wanted to say, what if Miss Luo dies? He was only glad that he changed his mind when the words reached his mouth. Otherwise, he was afraid that his blood would splatter on the spot. Still not scramming. A true scheme of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's confidence wasn't a self-directed act. It was carefully arranged so that others would act according to your wishes. Although White Dragon Temple was a temple and even had Great Master Liaochen overseeing it, as long as the word imperial was involved, there was no way it was clean. As long as it wasn't too excessive, such as killing or obscenity, Great Master Liaochen would turn a blind eye to it. In less than a quarter of an hour, an assassination was carried out in broad daylight. The layout was fast and the actions were swift. It was clear that White Dragon Temple also had people working for Li Hongyuan. In order to achieve the best results, Li Hongyuan didn't have too many people around him. However, because it was necessary to make the other party's people stay, every one of them was a ruthless character. Once the fight started, Li Hongyuan used all his strength. In addition, Jingwan's life or death was unknown. Suppressing his anxiety turned into a bloodthirsty desire. He pursued speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness. Not only was he ruthless to the enemy, he was also ruthless to himself. As long as it wasn't a fatal injury, he could even exchange injury for injury. The masked assassins of the fake monk then realized that there was a mistake. This Jin Qinwang wasn't just an empty shell. He was clearly that wolf, owl, and lion. Retreat. Unfortunately, it was already too late. They had already been led to a place arranged in advance. Because of the terrain, it wasn't easy to retreat. Even if they retreated, they would certainly be caught. Rather than being caught, it was better to commit suicide than to be caught. Since there was no way to retreat, they could only fight to the end. Killing Jin Qinwang was the only way to survive. As they fought and retreated, Li Hongyuan's clothes were almost soaked in blood. Some of it was his own, some of it was the enemy's. From the looks of it, he was becoming more and more exhausted, but his posture was nimble from beginning to end, without the slightest bit of weakness or surrender. The assassins trembled with fear. Their master still had such a terrifying opponent in the dark. They didn't know how many hidden losses he would suffer. Not to mention them, even Li Hongyuan's people were frightened by him. Although it wasn't that they hadn't seen their master's ruthless appearance, but those people were just trapped beasts without any leeway to resist. That was how he wanted to torment them. But now, it was a real life and death struggle. However, it didn't seem like their master was facing this kind of thing for the first time. Having good martial arts was one thing, fighting to the death was another. His hands were not soft, he didn't fear the blade, his reactions were agile, all of which showed that he had experienced hundreds of battles. The assassins originally had a lot of advantages in terms of numbers. Before they started, they felt that they had a 90% chance of success. At this moment, their manpower was sharply reduced again and again. However, Jin Qinwang's side was also an arrow at the end of its flight. There were only 2 people left at his side. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Gritting their teeth, they prepared for the final battle. Although the trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's confidence may have been an impromptu idea, this assassination had been prepared long ago. It only needed an opportunity. Li Hongyuan naturally couldn't really throw his own life away. At the critical moment, Li Hongyuan saw his bodyguards and several martial monks coming over. Li Hongyuan backhanded his blade. Because it was too tricky, the assassin couldn't block it. On the verge of death, Li Hongyuan burst out with his last remaining strength. He was originally at the edge of the slope. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, he took the opportunity to roll down. Wang Ye. The bodyguards rushed forward and saw this kind of scene. For a moment, their hearts jumped to their throats. The bodyguard who rushed to the front, without saying a word, cleanly disposed of the masked assassin who had one last breath left. Another bodyguard next to him grabbed him, leave him alive. But it was a pity that it was already too late. I saw Wang Ye roll down. In a moment of panic, my eyes turned red, so enough, and he coldly shouted. He was the head of the shadow guards and also the head of the bodyguards. It is more important to find Wang Ye first. If something happens to Wang Ye, needless to say, the others also knew that they were unable to protect their master. Even if Wang Ye didn't die, they absolutely wouldn't have a good end. However, if Wang Ye was still alive, they might still have a chance to live. Not daring to be negligent, they hurriedly followed the place where Li Hongyuan rolled down. And he checked the two brothers who followed Li Hongyuan. Although they were seriously injured, fortunately, their lives weren't in danger. They were just exhausted. He handed them over to the monks and also followed them down. After checking, the situation wasn't very good. Although it was a slope, it was also very steep. Perhaps it was because Li Hongyuan was unlucky. There were clearly trees next to him, but he just had to slide down along the lush weeds. The blood stains were very obvious. Below, there was a river, but the height was at least more than 300 feet. This situation made the bodyguards' faces pale. "Boss, what should we do?" Chapter 71. As for Li Hongyuan, who was suspected to be in a very bad condition or even dead, his condition was indeed not very good. The injury was not fake, and the excessive blood loss also caused him to feel a little dizzy. Although he was not in the water, he was still at the riverbank. "Master." One of the 4 shadow guards by his side, number 9, opened his mouth. He wanted to persuade him to go back, but in the end, he said, "Let this subordinate help you deal with your wound." If the wound was dealt with, how could he continue acting? Wan was so intelligent, she would definitely be able to see that Li Hongyuan had only taken some pills to stop the pain and bleeding. "How is Wan?" The shadow guard subconsciously reached out to help him, but Li Hongyuan glanced at him. The shadow guard also realized that he had made a stupid mistake. Because of Enjio's excellent medical skills, compared to the other shadow guards, he had the benevolence of a doctor. Another person tugged at him and stepped forward himself. Replying to Master, "Miss Luo is fine. Nanny Gong found her before us and has already confirmed that she should only have some bruises on her body. In addition, because of the shock from rolling down, she has temporarily fallen into a coma. She will wake up very soon and will not affect Master's plan. As for the others, the situation has not been confirmed." After a pause, Miss Luo was in the same carriage as the other girls. The female protector was not in the carriage at that time, so she could not protect Miss Luo. She couldn't help but explain to Granny Gong. Although Granny Gong's master had changed, it was still easy for her master to punish her. After learning about Jingwan's situation, they were actually very surprised. Although they all hoped that Miss Luo's skin was not broken at all. However, although the cliff wasn't very high, the bottom of the cliff was very dangerous. Not to mention the rugged rocks and dense vegetation, there were many areas that had collapsed due to the erosion of the rain. The bottom level was at least 50 to 60 feet high. The second level was less than 10 feet wide and was covered in slippery moss. Below that was the river bank and rocks. The height of the two levels was more than 10 feet. If one was accidentally thrown out of the carriage, it was very likely that one would fall to the bottom. Not to mention being smashed to pieces, there was a high chance that one would die. Including Wan Fangfei's carriage, there were a total of 3 carriages that fell off the cliff, but there were more people. Among everyone, Jingwan seemed to be the unluckiest to fall to the second level. Moreover, she was less than a palm's width away from the edge. However, she also seemed to be the luckiest to have suffered the lightest injuries. However, it was precisely because of Jingwan's position that these shadow guards were able to easily move her to the riverbank at the bottom, saving them the risk of being discovered before anyone else could find her. As long as their master went there, he would be able to have a perfect encounter. However, it was not a simple matter to take someone away from the Lady Protector. She was like an old hen protecting her chicks. She almost fought with them. Although Li Hongyuan was still able to divert his attention to plan and kill Jingwan after learning that Jingwan was in trouble, his attention returned to its original place only after confirming that Jingwan was safe. Originally, he had prepared for the worst. If Wan was seriously injured, he did not mind changing his original plan and saving the damsel in distress. However, God was on his side. As for whether Nurse Gong was in the wrong or not, it could be put aside for the time being. He would deal with it later. As for how Li Hongyuan and the others came down from the height of dozens of feet. Li Hongyuan had long been accustomed to preparing for a rainy day. He had already figured out the mountain terrain of White Dragon Temple. He even let the shadow guards go to almost every corner. When they came down from the top, there was a road that could not be called a road. Ordinary people could not walk on it at all. However, after they came down, it was completely destroyed. His plan had to leave enough time for him to be alone with Wan. Li Hongyuan stood up. With injuries all over his body, he walked down the riverbank step by step. Although his pace was not fast, each step was firm, leaving a trail of bloody footprints on the ground. The shadow guards followed behind Li Hongyuan and cleaned up the bloodstains he left behind. It was enough as long as they could create an illusion that their master fell into the river and then went down along the river. The shadow guards looked at their master's back and couldn't help but feel an indescribable emotion. Their master's temperament was sinister, ruthless, and temperamental, but they had a deep respect for him, not only because of his ability to devise strategies and control the world, but also because of his unyielding pride and his ability to do things to the extreme. It was not a short distance to reach the place where Jingwan was now. Not to mention the numerous small bends, there were even 2 big bends. It was not easy for Li Hongyuan, who was getting more and more tired with every step. If he let the shadow guards carry him forward, it was not that they could not move faster, but he would never allow it. Li Hongyuan felt that he was about to reach his limit, but even so, he did not think of anything else. He only thought that he had suffered a big loss this time and must find a way to make up for it from Wan. The more he thought, the more discordant it became. The degree of filth was directly proportional to his perfect face. Fortunately, no one knew. Otherwise, who knows how many people would be stunned, and then should it be said that he was worthy of being called Jin Qin Wang, who had seen all kinds of beauties. The dizziness became more and more intense, and the scenery in his eyes began to blur. However, the moment Jingwan's figure entered his line of sight, he could no longer see anything else. Step by step, he unwaveringly approached and waded into the water without hesitation. Fortunately, the water in this section was not deep and the current was relatively gentle. However, the river was very wide. The blood that had already dried up, after meeting the water, quickly spread out. Everywhere he passed, there was a pool of blood. Midway, his body uncontrollably staggered twice, drenched in sweat. The shadow guards formed a semicircle around him, fearing that he would fall into the water. Obviously, they still underestimated their master. Li Hongyuan walked to the edge. His consciousness was both fuzzy and clear. And this position was enough. He let himself fall down and completely sank into darkness, half of his body submerged by the river, and Joe hurriedly stepped forward and checked his pulse. He turned back. You must hurry. If you soak in the water for too long, I'm afraid that Master's life will be in danger. Then what are you waiting for? Go and wake Miss Luo up. And Jiao hurriedly got up and walked towards Jingwan, who was lying near the edge of the cliff. They naturally couldn't be more familiar with Jingwan, but they didn't understand what was so special about this girl that could make Master do this. If she was a stunning woman, perhaps Master just took a fancy to her beauty. If she was noble and had a strong background, perhaps Master was adding help to seize the throne. However, she was neither. Thinking of her current appearance, such a proud person who didn't even have a scratch on her skin in the past, not to mention the large and small injuries on her body, she was also dying. They couldn't help but have an inexplicable resentment towards Jingwan. And Joe, what are you thinking about? Hurry up. Another shadow guard walked in and urged. And Joe hurriedly took out a small porcelain bottle that he carried with him, unplugged the stopper, and shook it under Jingwan's nose. Jingwan frowned, and a slight sound came out of her mouth. She showed signs of waking up. Let's go. Pulling and Joe, they quickly left. If Miss Luo woke up and saw them, then everything Master did would be in vain. The four people quickly went away, hiding in the dark and paying attention to the situation here. It was quiet, but Jiao was particularly silent. The shadow guard just now put his hand on his shoulder, and Jiao, you just have to remember one thing. No matter what Miss Luo is like, she is the person Master has chosen. She will be the future Jin Wangfei, our female master. We can't interfere. What we have to do is to abide by our duties and do whatever Master asks us to do. It's just that I can't accept it for a while when I suddenly saw Master like that. Don't worry, I know what I should do. And Jiao also understood that as a shadow guard, his emotions just now were a little dangerous. He must remove it as soon as possible. If Master knew, he would go back and train again. If it was serious, he would directly lose his life. Jingwan felt pain all over her body. She slowly opened her eyes. After a while, she was completely awake. She tried to sit up. It wasn't very strenuous. She moved her hands and feet and carefully felt it. Very good. She was basically sure that it was all superficial injuries and didn't hurt her internal organs. However, because she was a little dizzy, she might have a slight concussion. Jingwan stood up and thought of the thrill of falling off the cliff. She thought that she might die this time. She didn't expect that the actual consequences were almost negligible. However, she probably had to thank Wu Anho's Shitzi for being able to survive. Although she panicked after falling off the cliff, her mind wasn't blank. She remembered very clearly that after being thrown out of the carriage, Wu Anho's Shitzi pulled her in time and didn't let her fall straight to the sharp boulder. Although it was also because of him that she fell, his life-saving grace couldn't be denied. Jingwan was very worried about Sun Yijia, Yuan Chaoqiao, and Zhou Yingshuang, who were in the same carriage as her. She didn't know if they would be as lucky as her. However, fortunately, their carriage was faster. Grandmother's carriage was much behind and definitely wasn't affected. Looking at the place where she fell, it had to be said that her luck was heaven-defying. There were rocks all around, but only this place was full of sand, ash, and a lot of scattered hay. Jingwan didn't show any surprise towards these abrupt things. This was because there was a temporary resting place that was dug out by people. There were more hay and other things piled up inside. Presumably, it was the temporary resting place of the villagers who went along the river to enter the mountain. The hay that was dug out outside should be the animals and monkeys that came down from the mountain. The monkeys, hiding in the dark, were very anxious because their future mistress hadn't noticed their master. Most of Jingwan's thoughts were right. This was indeed the masterpiece of the villagers at the foot of the White Dragon Temple. This accident saved a lot of effort for the secret guards to fake the crime scene. Jingwan looked up. It was so high that she definitely couldn't go up. It wouldn't be easy for the people above to come down to find her. She looked around again. There were endless cliffs and she didn't know how long the river was. Instead of spending time trying to go out along the river, it was better to wait here. After all, there might be another way down from the White Dragon Temple. If she went by herself and missed it, it would be very disadvantageous for her. She could only secretly pray that they were all right. As for her grandmother and others, there was nothing she could do about it. Suddenly, there was a splash of water. Jingwan looked back. Before she noticed where the sound came from, she saw the figure lying by the water. Jingwan's heart jumped. She hesitated for a moment. It seemed that the person floated down from the upper reaches. This might be a big trouble, but she couldn't just leave him to die. Seeing Jingwan walking towards their master, the several people in the dark finally breathed a sigh of relief. Jingwan walked to Li Hongyuan's side. At first glance, this person was really miserable. His clothes were torn into pieces. Looking at the neat cuts, it was obviously caused by a sharp weapon. If blood was seen every time he went down, it could be imagined how serious his injuries were. Squatting down, she reached out to check his breath. Although it was weak, he was still alive. This was good. However, Jingwan wasn't sure what his situation was. She didn't know how long he could hold on. Would he disappear in the next moment? Because there was some disheveled hair on his face, Jingwan still felt that this person was somewhat familiar. She brushed aside the hair. Her first thought was that this person looked too good. Then she immediately reacted. Wasn't this the sixth prince, Jin Qinwang? Although Jingwan only met Li Hongyuan once in Dingguo Gongfu and didn't even look at him carefully, his face was really too conspicuous. It was hard to not remember. It was obvious that he was assassinated. Sure enough, it was a big trouble. Thinking of this person's reputation, although she couldn't arbitrarily judge a person based on what she heard, this face was really too attractive. It might not be a groundless rumor. Even so, Jingwan still decided to save him. After all, Jingwan wasn't a native of this world. In addition, the current situation was special. She couldn't care less about the boundaries between men and women. She reached out and touched his chest, neck, and limbs to make sure that there weren't any fractures. She didn't want to cause a second injury if she moved him. These simple first aid methods, as well as some life skills, were all things she had been forced to learn during the most difficult period of her previous life. This Miss Luo is rather too. Master, to her, is a strange man. A shadow guard couldn't help but frown. She's checking if Master has any fractures. It's obvious that she knows some medical skills. The current situation is special. Even if her behavior is inappropriate, she can't be blamed. On the contrary, she's meticulous and wholeheartedly thinking for Master. Under the premise of knowing Master's identity, this is really rare. After all, if she's not careful, she'll be putting her own reputation on the line. Not many women in the boudoir can do this. And Jiu opened his mouth. Because of Jingwan's behavior, his view of her changed a little. But if it was another man, would she also be like this? No, there wouldn't be an if. The Lady Protector wasn't a vegetarian. Because they were here, the Lady Protector didn't follow them down. Other men shouldn't even think about getting close to Miss Luo. Thinking like this, his feelings naturally improved a lot. After confirming that it was only an injury caused by a sharp weapon, Jingwan struggled to help him up. Because she had been exercising all year round, she naturally wasn't a delicate and weak woman. It was a little difficult for a man's weight to be all pressed on her body, but it wasn't to the extent that she couldn't walk. However, because of the force, the injuries on her body were more intense. Jingwan half supported and half dragged him into the temporary shelter and put him on the hay. Since she decided to save him, she naturally didn't think much about it. She quickly took off his accessories and put them aside. Then, she carefully took off his clothes, leaving only a pair of underwear. His appearance was off the charts, and so was his figure. A full 8-pack of abdominal muscles, but they weren't protruding. They presented a perfect streamlined shape. She didn't need to touch it to feel the strength contained in it. He really was the darling of the creator. However, this wasn't a figure that a man who was intoxicated with wine and women could have. Jingwan naturally didn't have the time to pay attention to these. This perfect body really had a lot of injuries, mainly concentrated on the chest and arms. However, it was less than expected. Obviously, there were some places where the clothes were only torn. Even so, the situation wasn't optimistic. The wounds were a little white because of soaking in water. However, Jingwan didn't learn medical skills after all. She didn't know the result of soaking for a long time. In fact, Li Hongyuan's plan wasn't without flaws, especially when targeting Jingwan. She wasn't his enemy, so there was really no need to be so meticulous and thorough. After careful consideration, there would always be clues. It was just that Jingwan didn't know that she was being targeted. She also deliberately calculated her. She never thought in that direction. Even if she had doubts, she wouldn't think deeply about it. Li Hongyuan also grasped this mentality of hers, so he could be so unscrupulous. In this place where a cold could kill people, these wounds were easy to be infected if they weren't treated in time. Jingwan's face was very dignified. Looking around, there were very obvious traces. It could be seen that people often came and went. Jingwan looked around and found some commonly used things, such as a fire extinguisher and a crock. Although she knew how to make a fire even if she didn't have it, it would take time. Moreover, she only knew how to do it, but she didn't really try it. She didn't know if it would work. It was better to have ready-made things. It was better to have some ready-made things. She used hay to light the fire, then added some firewood to make a fire. She then moved Li Hongyuan's body so that he wouldn't be cold. Jingwan picked up a crock and took Li Hongyuan's underwear. She went to the river to wash it and then filled it with water. She put the crock on a simple stove. After the water boiled, she poured some out and put it to the side to cool. Then she tore open the clothes and threw them in to boil. She scooped them up. Because it was urgent, Jingwan dried them. She didn't know if this would affect the disinfection. She shook the cold water to quickly cool it down. Then she dipped a cloth in the water and wiped Li Hongyuan's wounds one by one. She then wrapped the dried cloth around them. Jingwan's bandaging skills were naturally unquestionable. When Jingwan half carried Li Hongyuan and wrapped the cloth around his back, she suddenly heard this prince murmur in her ear. His breath fell on her sensitive earlobe, making it slightly itchy. It seemed like he was calling someone's name. Jingwan couldn't hear it clearly. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but he seemed to be calling Wan. Jingwan naturally wouldn't be narcissistic enough to think that he was calling her. He was either calling someone else, or it was a similar pronunciation. The deepest wound on her left arm was so deep that the bone was almost visible. It was very troublesome, but there was no needle and thread. She couldn't stitch it up even if she wanted to. After she finished, Jingwan's body was sweating slightly due to the pain. Jingwan frowned. She also needed to wash up. Jingwan went to the river and wiped her body with a wet handkerchief. Then she saw the fish swimming in the river. Very good, dinner was settled. In her previous life, when she was abnormally poor, catching fish was naturally a necessary skill. She didn't expect that even this skill would come in handy now. Jingwan turned back and found a few strands of pliable dry grass. She tied up some areas of her body that were in the way, such as her sleeves and skirt. Then she returned to the river and took off her shoes and socks. She stood barefoot on the gravel. Her feet, which had been wearing shoes all year round, suddenly came into contact with the ground. It really wasn't an ordinary pain. However, because Jingwan often walked barefoot on the cobblestones in her own territory, this bit of pain wasn't unbearable. She stretched her feet into the water to explore. The river water in the early spring was still relatively cold. What's more, the feet were not as sensitive as the hands that were exposed to the air all year round. When both feet were submerged in the water, Jingwan couldn't help but shiver a little. After standing for a bit to adapt, she slowly moved forward. Her movements were very light. Her feet were basically gliding in the water. She didn't raise her feet, so naturally there wasn't much movement. When the water was about to reach her knees, she found her target. Jingwan stopped, bent down, opened her hands, and used only a few seconds to lock on to the target. She quickly reached out. With a whoosh, she raised her hands. A fish that was wider than a palm was tightly caught in her hands. Because the fish left the water, it quickly swayed its tail, flinging out water droplets that scattered like pearls. Sure enough, it was something that was engraved into her bones. After so many years, she still didn't get used to it. Looking at this plump fish, Jingwan smiled with satisfaction. Originally, if it was only for her to eat, one was enough. However, she wasn't sure if that honorable Qin Wang would wake up, so she decided to catch another one. Retreating, she threw the fish in her hands towards the riverbank. Jingwan didn't know that her straightforward action of catching the fish was clearly seen by several people in the dark. They couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. They believed that even if they were to catch the fish, they might not be able to catch it with their bare hands. What's more, she succeeded in one strike. This was definitely a fish-catching veteran. Speaking of which, how could a young lady from the boudoir have this kind of ability? The Luo family was able to cover half the sky in Qian Prefecture. There were naturally countless kinds of villages. Perhaps it was because she was fond of playing that she practiced this skill. But if it was just playing, how could she play to this extent? But they couldn't think of any other explanation. So, in the end, should they say that she had, or that she had a unique style? Perhaps it should be said that she's worthy of being the person that Master fancied. She's far from being comparable to an ordinary delicate woman. One of them said. The other three looked at him, their eyes clearly saying, "There's such a saying." For Jingwan, catching the fish was relatively simple. Instead, it was more troublesome to handle it. Because of the strict management of ironware, in a farmer's household, every item that was forged with iron was very precious. There were no knives at all. As a result, Jingwan could only temporarily use a stone to polish one. To save time, choosing a stone was naturally very important. Polishing a stone was definitely not an easy task. After a few rounds, Jingwan's hands turned red. She raised her hand to look and took the remaining cloth to wrap around her hand. This was better. The shadow guards were vexed and had already made preparations to be punished by their master. The future Wang Fei was a proud and precious person. Even a little bit of skin would make their master's heart ache. To be tossed around like this. If they had known earlier, they would have left a dagger on their master's hand. A Wang carrying an exquisite dagger inlaid with gems was very normal and would never arouse suspicion. It took a lot of time to properly handle the fish. Being able to find salt was definitely an unexpected surprise. Although it was a little less, it was enough to cook fish soup. Originally, she wanted to roast a fish, but after thinking about it, she decided against it. Boiling the fish soup, she dried her wet clothes. From time to time, she would also feed Li Hongyuan some water to moisten his lips. Looking at the chipped rough porcelain bowl in her hand, Jingwan even joked a few words to amuse herself. The noble Jin Qin Wang has been reduced to using this kind of thing. It's really wronged you. If Li Hongyuan had consciousness, he would probably think, Ben Wang doesn't mind you feeding him personally. Jingwan drank a bowl of fish soup. Perhaps it was because of the tossing and turning, plus her usual appetite was not bad. She ate the entire fish. Fish that only had salt added naturally couldn't compare to meticulously cooked fish. However, it was purely natural. Perhaps it was because the water and soil here was different that the fish didn't have a fishy smell. The taste was still not bad. She fed Li Hongyuan some fish soup. Without a spoon or the like, it was really difficult to feed him. The sky gradually darkened, but there was still no one coming to find them. It seemed that there was no way down. They should be preparing to take a detour from the foot of the mountain or some other place. Jingwan herself was fine, but she was very worried about Li Hongyuan. His current situation wasn't good at all. She didn't need to take any chances. It was inevitable that he would have a fever. Although she was tired and her body was in pain, Jingwan didn't dare to sleep. Not long after night fell, Li Hongyuan really started to have a fever. Jingwan applied a compress on his forehead and wiped his body at the same time, over and over again without stopping. She didn't expect that this would make his fever go down, she just hoped that he would feel a little more comfortable. Perhaps it was because of the high fever, or perhaps it was because deep in his heart, he was still thinking about the purpose of this trip. Li Hongyuan woke up, but he was still in a confused state and wasn't very clear-headed. However, he was very sure of one thing. The person in front of him was the one he wanted. Jingwan was caught off guard. Li Hongyuan grabbed Jingwan's wrist, and as he exerted force, she bumped into his sturdy chest. Wan. His voice was full of infinite affection and yearning, and his voice was hoarse, low, and sexy. At that moment, it was simply enough to make one's bones melt. Jingwan was suddenly a little confused. She didn't even hear what he said clearly. After a moment, she realized how ambiguous their current posture was. She struggled, but the more she struggled, the tighter Li Hongyuan held her. His hand was like a pair of pliers. And Li Hongyuan's consciousness wasn't clear. He didn't have much willpower and didn't know how to restrain himself. He just followed his inner desire, longing for her, wanting her. Her struggle made him feel that she was trying to escape from him. How could he allow this to happen? He grabbed her, turned over, and pressed her under his body. Jingwan's limbs were locked tightly. He suddenly opened his eyes. Those deep eyes were filled with an almost crazy possessiveness. Wan, you are mine. You can only be mine in this life. Don't even think about escaping. Then he unceremoniously kissed her. Jingwan was a little frightened. In the face of danger, it was instinctive to resist. Chapter 72. Jingwan felt like she wasn't facing a person, but a real beast. His teeth seemed to have sunk deep into her blood vessels. She didn't dare to move. Her body froze, and her heart almost jumped out of her throat. Perhaps because he felt that Jingwan had become obedient, Li Hongyuan slowly let go of her. Then, he stuck out his tongue and licked it. It was obviously salty and had a rusty taste, but he seemed to find it incomparably delicious. He licked and sucked 2 more times, so much so that Jingwan could even hear him swallow. Wan, you're mine. Mine. Don't try to leave me. Otherwise, I'll catch you and swallow you whole even if you're at the end of the world. Although his voice wasn't particularly clear, Jingwan heard every word clearly this time. Was it too late to regret now? She was kind enough to save someone. She definitely didn't want to put herself in danger. She felt that she was more unlucky than the farmer in The Farmer and the Snake. At least, the snake attacked indiscriminately. As for her, she was completely suffering for someone else, okay? That's right. No matter how many times Li Hongyuan called Wan, and no matter how familiar Jingwan was with this name, she didn't feel the slightest sense of substitution. She didn't want to feel the slightest sense of substitution. She cursed the person who stressed her name countless times in her heart. Hurry up and tie up your extremely controlling beast. Don't let it out to harm others. One day in the future, when Jingwan found out that the Wan he was talking about was her, she wondered what expression Jingwan would have. Should she tie up this beast or not? Tying it up would only harm herself. If she didn't tie it up, it would harm others, and herself. After all, Li Hongyuan wasn't in a good state. When he loosened his grip, he seemed a little weak. His whole body was lying on Jingwan's body defenselessly. However, the 2 words, Wan, kept coming out of his mouth, as if he was sleep-talking. Li Hongyuan didn't respond for a long time. Jingwan thought that he had fainted again. Wan. These 2 words suddenly rang in her ears. Jingwan didn't feel anything at first, but as she listened, Jingwan felt embarrassed. Jingwan tried to push him away. Then, as if he was greatly provoked, he slowly raised his head, opened his eyes, and stared at Jingwan. Wan, do you want to leave me that much? His palms slid around her waist and unconsciously tugged at her clothes. He felt as if he could tear them apart with just a little force. No. Jingwan anxiously and quickly denied it. She grabbed his hand that was on her waist. If her clothes were ruined by him, then she would have no choice but to risk her life to escape from his side. However, he didn't wear clothes because of his injury. It was completely different from a man and a woman whose clothes were ruined. If it was the former, she could barely stand on the side of righteousness. If it was the latter, she would completely lose her innocence. She only had one fate. When she went back, she would be carried into Jin Palace in a small sedan chair. From then on, she would be isolated from the world. It's just that it's a little uncomfortable to be pressed down by you. Jingwan patted him comfortingly. Li Hongyuan frowned for a while, as if he just realized what she was saying. As long as you obediently stay by my side, I can do anything you want. Li Hongyuan said. He hugged Jingwan's waist and turned her over, letting her lie on her side. However, his arms never let go. Then Jingwan found that his wound was bleeding again because of the movement just now. You're feverish. I'll wipe your body. Also, I'll treat your wound again. Can you let go of me first? Li Hongyuan, who closed his eyes again, acted as if he didn't hear anything. Naturally, he was indifferent. Jingwan was helpless. After thinking about it, she braced herself and moved closer to his ear. She softly comforted him and promised him that she would never leave. Li Hongyuan, who was originally quiet, gradually shook his head from side to side. His brows were tightly knitted, as if he was in a dream. His arms unconsciously tightened. After the danger to Jingwan's neck passed, her waist was in danger again. It was about to break. She should have looked at the almanac before going out today. Perhaps there was a taboo on it. She was thinking about whether she should find the culprit who caused them to come to White Dragon Temple today. Because of Jingwan's words, Li Hongyuan remembered that in his previous life, Jingwan also saved him. The difference between that time and now was that his life was really in danger. If it weren't for Jingwan, he was sure that he would have died. What's more, at that time, he was at the most painful turning point in his life. He was suspicious of everything and everyone around him. Jingwan knew his situation and knew that it was better for her to save him than not, but she still chose to save him without hesitation. She also went through a lot and was facing an even bigger storm. Instead of being crushed, she became more tenacious. She tolerated his bad temper and took care of him wholeheartedly day after day. Although she almost didn't say anything after he woke up, and there was no smile on her face, you could see that she always had a straight back. Li Hongyuan didn't know when it started, but he no longer spoke ill of her or smashed the medicine bowl she brought. He began to be silent, and his eyes began to follow her. Before that, he had already noticed this woman. He even admired her in his heart. Her unyielding spirit, her courage, her tenacity, and her ability were far inferior to many men. When he couldn't take his eyes off her, he knew that he wanted her. However, this woman had already become someone else's wife. She didn't belong to him. He no longer gave up on himself. So what if everyone in the world wronged him? There was always someone who could be sincere to him. She did her best to save him, so he had to be worthy of her sincerity, right? From that moment on, Li Hongyuan really changed. He wanted to sit on the throne, and he wanted this woman. It could be said that without Jingwan, there might not be the Emperor Li Hongyuan who became the final winner in the desperate situation. Unfortunately, there was a word in the world called too late. He didn't have the time to obtain the supreme power to protect her, and she had already died. Therefore, when he had a chance to start over, the throne was no longer the most important thing to him. What he wanted most was to have her, and then protect her. He wanted to keep her smile, and protect her restrained gentleness and straightforwardness. Even he couldn't hurt a single finger of hers. Of course, this was with the exception of special injuries caused under certain special circumstances. He schemed, sought the throne, and seized power. It was all just to let her stand at the highest position. No one could threaten her position. Jingwan had never experienced it herself, so she would never know that her heart was actually the softest. Even now, when she was under Li Hongyuan's control, when she comforted him, she removed all distracting thoughts and used up all her patience. That was her most unique gentleness. Not many people could resist it, especially when they were in a vulnerable state. Even though he knew that things were different now, Li Hongyuan was still trapped in the dream of his previous life. Because she was someone else's wife, she rejected him. Even though he used despicable means to take her, she still ran away from him. Then, before he could obtain the supreme power, she left him completely. She was so far away that he could never reach her. So now, he only wanted to hold on to her tightly. No matter if it was herself or anyone else, he couldn't let her leave him. He couldn't, no matter what kind of emotions Jingwan had, she couldn't vent it on someone who was seriously injured and unconscious. She had to be patient and tell him over and over again that she wouldn't leave, that she wouldn't leave. Li Hongyuan finally sobered up a little again. He opened his eyes and looked at Jingwan. His intestines turned 100 times, tenderly and affectionately, Wan. His gaze at this moment made Jingwan's heart skip 2 beats uncontrollably. She felt that it was inexplicably familiar. Plus, his voice. Jingwan abruptly froze, suddenly remembering that strange spring dream last night. That man who made love with her, the only thing she remembered clearly was the other party's gaze, but it coincided with Jin Qinhuang's gaze at this time. Jingwan had the urge to cover her face. Could it be that last night's dream was actually a kind of foreshadowing her encounter today? But why didn't it foreshadow anything else, such as falling off the cliff today? Some things, once they crawled out of your memory, the difficulty of pressing them back would increase exponentially. especially now that she was in a state of ambiguity and fanciful thoughts. Being stared at by him like this, in addition to the disturbing images that kept appearing in her mind, Jingwan inexplicably felt her face turn red and her heart beat faster. She awkwardly and somewhat embarrassedly turned her gaze away. Li Hongyuan reached out and pinched her chin, forcing her to look at him. When Jingwan felt that he might kiss her again, he opened his mouth and said, "Wan has never taken the initiative to kiss me." He pointed at his chapped lips, "Kiss me once, then I'll let you go." Even if Jingwan had a good temper, she couldn't help but want to kick him to death. If it wasn't for the fact that she didn't have any interaction with him from beginning to end, and that his attitude was too natural and casual, Jingwan would have thought that he was actually calling her and that his consciousness was completely awake. He was deliberately taking liberties with her and not treating her as someone else. Li Hongyuan closed his eyes again. His attitude was very obvious. If she wasn't willing, then forget it. But don't expect him to let go. Jingwan was so angry that she raised her hand and hammered him. Li Hongyuan happened to fall on the open wound, and he groaned. Jingwan hurriedly apologized. When he took an inch and asked for a mile again, her apology was immediately thrown out of the sky. She even gave him a few kisses, but subconsciously, she used less strength. "If the mountain doesn't come to me, then I'll go to the mountain." Li Hongyuan held the back of Jingwan's head and kissed her fiercely. He swept her mouth completely to the side, let her go, and set her free. Jingwan immediately rolled around. She didn't even care about her image, jumped up, and wiped her mouth fiercely. Li Hongyuan looked at Jingwan, who was so energetic, and suddenly smiled. He said in a low voice, "That's great." This time, Jingwan really covered her face with her hands. His appearance was too foul, and his smile was even more foul. She was clearly the one at a disadvantage, but why was her anger getting weaker and weaker? She admitted that she was a love-struck fool, but it turned out that there was an invisible, love-struck fool attribute. It was just that she hadn't met such an evildoer before, so it hadn't been discovered. Li Hongyuan gave a low laugh. "I didn't know that Wan had such a side." Then he suddenly coughed twice. The red on his face from the high temperature became more obvious, and his breathing weakened again. Jingwan threw away all her thoughts in an instant. She reached out to touch Li Hongyuan's forehead. She unconsciously pulled her hand back like she had been burned. The temperature rose again. Jingwan's heart was burning with anxiety. She was not only worried about Li Hongyuan's life, but also about her little life and the fate of the Luo family. A dignified prince had died in front of her. It had nothing to do with her, but it also had something to do with her. Then the Luo family would be implicated by her. Your Highness, please don't let anything happen to you." "Your Highness." Jingwan hurriedly rebandaged his wound and wiped his body, while trying to wake him up. Wan, don't leave me." Even if he fell asleep again, he still murmured this sentence. "All right, I won't leave. As long as you're well, I'll promise you anything." Jingwan should be glad. When she answered this sentence, Li Hongyuan's consciousness had almost sunk into darkness. Otherwise, according to his temperament, if he caught this sentence in the future, who knew how much land Jingwan had to give him and how much compensation? The shadow guards outside almost couldn't help but rush in. But thinking that their master had just received a favor from the beauty, they reckoned that he wouldn't like them to appear. It would be better to wait. Jingwan kept wiping him. After nearly an hour, Li Hongyuan's body temperature finally dropped a little. Even though Jingwan exercised every day, her hands still felt weak. She sat paralyzed beside Li Hongyuan, looking at his peaceful sleeping face, lost in thought. After about a quarter of an hour, her empty brain started to operate again. First, she checked his temperature. It didn't rise anymore, which could be considered a good thing. Jingwan hugged her knees and sat at the side, starting to think about how to deal with the aftermath of this matter. As for losing her first kiss and being molested by him, she naturally wouldn't be like a native girl who sought death. She would just treat it as being bitten by a dog. Right now, she wasn't sure who would find them first. Would it be someone from her family? Would it be a monk from White Dragon Temple? Would it be Jin Qinhuang's people? If it was the former, she believed that they would be willing to help her cover up the matter. If it was a monk from the temple, as long as Great Master Liao Qin was really like the rumors, then there was no need to worry. The trouble was the latter. They obeyed Jin Qinhuang's orders and could even be considered as Jin Qinhuang's private property. Everything was for the benefit of Jin Qinhuang. In their view, since she saw their master's body, then she was already their master's person. Although she was a junior of a court official, her background wasn't that strong. Then, even if she saved their master, letting her enter the Wangfu to serve their master was already a great reward. Not only would they erase the grace of saving their lives, they would also be grateful. This was a natural way of thinking, and there was only one person who could interfere with their way of thinking. Jingwan's gaze once again fell on Li Hongyuan. How will you treat me? He was a Wang Ye, what did he not have? Perhaps she could let him act as if he didn't know who saved him. But, if she refused like this, wouldn't he feel that he had lost face and fly into a rage out of humiliation? She could choose to leave early, but if Jin Qinhuang breathed his last, he would definitely investigate to the end. She didn't think that she wouldn't be found out. Maybe when the time came, she would be directly branded as the assassin of the prince. Then she would just wait for her whole family to be executed. Jingwan, who was lost in thought, naturally didn't know that she was completely looking for trouble. Whatever situation she thought of would not happen, the people outside had already thought of everything for her. Because the moonlight wasn't bright, almost nothing could be seen outside. Li Hongyuan's four shadow guards came closer after the night turned dark, so that if their master was in a critical situation, they could use the excuse that they just happened to find their location. These people were well trained, so Jingwan naturally couldn't discover them. It was just that the result of listening to this kind of corner was often embarrassing oneself. They had seen their master play around with other women. Without even touching the corner of his clothes, he could make those women fall head over heels for him. They had also seen how those women who tried to get close to him in private ended up in a miserable state. However, they had never seen him so domineeringly possessive of a woman. He didn't allow her to refuse or resist. He also had an unprecedented tenderness and unreserved pampering. As long as you obediently stay by my side, I can do anything you want. No one was clearer than them about the meaning of this sentence. Because they hadn't seen any movement inside for a long time, and seeing that Miss Luo seemed to be somewhat drowsy, the few people finally couldn't help but order some sedative medicine, and Jingwan finally fell asleep. The few people hurried in to check on Li Hongyuan's situation, but before they could approach, the sleeping Li Hongyuan suddenly opened his eyes, sharpness and killing intent coexisting. The few people were frightened by his gaze. When they came in, they were very sure that their master was asleep, so the current situation could only mean one thing. The injured master was more alert than usual. Even if it was a sound that ordinary people couldn't detect, he could let him know, and then he reacted almost instinctively, forcing himself to wake up. Perhaps what made him react this way wasn't that he was afraid that someone would take the opportunity to harm him, but that he always remembered in his consciousness that there was another person who needed his protection by his side. The few people hurriedly knelt down on one knee to beg for forgiveness. Li Hongyuan didn't look at them, his eyes fell on Jingwan who fell beside him. Master, it's just a sedative medicine, not a knockout drug. And Jiu hurriedly explained in a low voice. This was the reason why they came in now, because they didn't dare to use knockout drugs, and sedative medicine didn't have much effect in a situation where people were more alert. Li Hongyuan didn't make a sound. After a moment, Jiu came forward. Because he only paid attention to him and didn't pay attention to Jingwan, and Jiu almost touched Jingwan, so he was kicked by Li Hongyuan. Fortunately, he didn't have much strength now, so Jiu wasn't injured. The few people's eyes darkened. Perhaps it was because their master cared far more about an insignificant woman than they, the subordinates who risked their lives for him, so they felt it was unfair in their hearts. But after Miss Luo came to the capital in a short period of time, especially today's matter, they gradually realized that in their master's heart, Miss Luo might have already surpassed himself. So, what other thoughts could they have? And Jiu came forward again, and naturally went around from the side. After checking Li Hongyuan's pulse, and Jiu found that Li Hongyuan's situation was better than he expected. He looked at the bandage and wasn't sure if it was related to Miss Luo's previous treatment method. He was quite surprised when he saw it. Miss Luo even knew some things that they didn't know, so he was no longer surprised that she could take care of people so well. He looked at the knot of the bandage again. It didn't knot, so he gave up the idea of opening it to look at the wound. Li Hongyuan didn't refuse to eat the pills that Jiu handed over, and then told them when they would come to pick him up. Quietly coming and quietly leaving. Then, a doubt emerged in their hearts. When Master was facing Miss Luo before, was he completely awake or was he in a semi-conscious state? If it was the latter, they could reluctantly accept it. After all, it was the person he had been thinking about for so long, it was understandable that he couldn't control his emotions. But if it was the former, even if it was their master, they couldn't help but say that it was too shameless. The shameless Jin Qin Wang would only be more shameless. He didn't know what was called the most shameless. Even if Jingwan fell asleep because of the sedative medicine, her sleep wasn't very peaceful. After hearing Li Hongyuan's movements, she sat up. She was annoyed at how she fell asleep and hurriedly went to check on Li Hongyuan's situation. This time, she didn't feel hot, but felt cold instead. Jingwan turned around and poked at the fire, adding in some firewood. Then she prepared to move Li Hongyuan closer to the fire. But she forgot that this was a jackal who didn't forget to eat meat even when his life was in danger. So when she approached him, she was pulled over, and he even habitually grabbed her to his mouth and took 2 bites. Jingwan's face immediately darkened, hating herself for not having a long memory. But this time, she learned to be obedient. As long as he didn't move his mouth, she would let him hold her and not struggle. Then she tried to use the previous method to appease him. Unfortunately, this time, even if her mouth was dry from talking, a certain person didn't move. He just held her in his arms like he was protecting food. Jingwan finally gave up and gave up. She would just treat it as a natural heater. In any case, it was still cold at night. In this world, Jingwan had been sleeping by herself since she was born. Because she wasn't a real child, even the nanny who accompanied her to sleep was rejected by her. Suddenly being held in someone's arms, plus the pain in her body, she felt very uncomfortable. She couldn't do anything while being imprisoned in his arms. She might as well sleep peacefully. But even if she was sleepy and tired, it was still very difficult to fall asleep. Jingwan tried to ignore the hand on her waist as much as possible. She began to count sheep in her heart. She didn't know how long had passed before she finally fell asleep in a daze. Jingwan didn't know that after she fell asleep, Li Hongyuan actually opened his eyes. Right now, he was really very awake. It had to be said that this was thanks to his strong physique and Enjio's medicine. Everyone said that he didn't raise trash. Enjio's medical skills were naturally very good. If he was released, it wouldn't be a problem for him to become a miracle doctor. Li Hongyuan touched Jingwan's face and whispered, "Wan, you have to start getting used to me now. You can't wait until after we get married and still not let me hug you." This laid the foundation for this smelly and shameless person to often attack at night. Just like the previous night, Li Hongyuan slept well in the following days. When it was time for Li Hongyuan and the shadow guards to agree on this time, they made a noise outside. Naturally, they didn't want Jingwan to be embarrassed after coming in. At the moment of the noise, Jingwan basically woke up. When she was thinking about how to get rid of Li Hongyuan's arms, she didn't expect that when she gently turned over, Li Hongyuan's arm would let go. Although she was very surprised, Jingwan still quickly stood up. A moment later, a group of people led by an Yi walked in with torches. Chapter 73. Does Miss know who we are? An Yi clearly knew everything, but when he saw Jingwan, he still appropriately expressed surprise. Jingwan didn't answer him and just glanced at Li Hongyuan. Her meaning couldn't be more obvious. And Jiu no longer hesitated and quickly went forward to check Li Hongyuan's condition again. Fortunately, the medicine had taken effect and he was gradually getting better. He nodded to the others and then nimbly untied the cloth strips on Li Hongyuan's body, applied medicine on him, and then used a brand new white cloth to bandage him. Compared to Jingwan alone, it was much easier for Jiu to treat his wounds with help. After that, the two worked together and quickly helped him put on his clothes. It was obvious that it was his usual clothes, low-key and gorgeous. With just a simple tidying up, Li Hongyuan's sorry state was swept away. With his eyes closed, he was definitely a quiet and peaceful sleeping beautiful man. And Yi saw that Li Hongyuan's side was neatly tidied up and once again looked at Jingwan. We all know about what happened halfway up the mountain. It seems that Miss is the Luo family's third Mississippi. For Miss to be safe and sound, it is worthy of celebration. Jingwan nodded, indeed. After hesitating for a moment, she opened her mouth. May I ask how are the others? Their lives are not in danger. Even so, it didn't mean that they were all right. However, it was good to be alive. Being alive represented hope. Many thanks. You don't deserve it. It should be us thanking Mississippi. If it wasn't for Miss, we don't know what would have happened to Master. If something happened to Master, we can't absolve ourselves from the blame even if we die 10,000 times. It was just a coincidence that we ran into him. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't leave him in the lurch. Moreover, Qin Wang is a noble descendant of the heavens. Naturally, the heavens help the worthy. And he secretly said in his heart, there wouldn't be anyone else. If they happened to run into him, they would also be cleared out. Miss is too modest. Jingwan declined to comment and didn't want to be entangled in this matter anymore. Then, it's still the same words as before. How are you going to deal with me? Not only an E, but even the others were secretly complaining incessantly. They had already diverged, so why did they have to turn back to this question? Jingwan only thought that Li Hongyuan was still asleep, but they knew very well that their master was awake. How could they dispose of his sweetheart in front of their master? How many lives did they have? But the second time she asked, if he still avoided talking about it, it would inevitably arouse her suspicion. And he glanced at his master, hoping to get a hint. Unfortunately, his master clearly planned to pretend to the end. Looking at the others, all of them were very busy, and none of them paid any attention to him. He secretly scolded them for having no sense of loyalty. However, he also knew that these guys did not want to offend their future mistress. What if she decided to settle accounts with them in the future? After pondering for a moment, he could only brace himself and ask, Miss, what are your thoughts? Do you want a status or something else? Can you handle this kind of small matter on behalf of your master? Jingwan interrupted him. Small matter. Great aunt, ancestor, your matter, even if it's a sesame or mung bean, you still have to deal with it as a big matter. Moreover, this really is not a small matter. You don't have to look down on yourself. This one naturally cannot, but this one will report misintentions back to my master and let him decide. Jingwan thought that according to Jin Qinhuang's casual attitude towards women, it would be normal for his subordinates to casually deal with people. Fortunately, Li Hongyuan did not know Jingwan's thoughts, otherwise he might be so angry that he would vomit blood. It was even more likely that he would ruthlessly retaliate against Jingwan. Then, please tell Wang Ye that Chenna does not want anything. Treat it as if I have never seen Wang Ye and have never saved Wang Ye. Naturally, you have never seen me. There was no intersection in the past and there will be no intersection in the future. Great Aunt, I'm afraid that I can't let you do as you wish. Not only was there an intersection in the past, there will be an even greater entanglement in the future. This one will pass on Miss words as it is. Jingwan nodded. I will wait for Wang Ye's decision. If Wang Ye wants Miss to enter the Fu, what will Miss do? And he curiously asked, but after he asked, he faintly regretted it. He originally wanted to remedy the situation, but because he had been intentionally or unintentionally paying attention to his master, fearing that he had some instructions that he did not see. This time, he really bumped into his half-opened eyes. He did not need to think to know that his master also wanted to know the answer, so the words that had just slipped to his mouth were swallowed back down. You are too rude. Even if her family background was not prominent, but this was not something that a bodyguard could ask, even if this bodyguard served a member of the imperial family. And he was embarrassed. He was the one who sought death first, so even if he really died, he had to bite the bullet and seek death to the end. This one is only doing my duty. I thought that if my master asked, there would be an explanation. I did not mean to offend Mississippi asking Miss to forgive me. Jingwan smiled, truly a loyal and good bodyguard. This question, wait until your master really wants me to enter Jin Wangfu, then I will use my actions to tell you. And he felt that although she was smiling, her eyes were really cold. It even made him feel that it was very similar to his master at certain times, making him unable to help but feel apprehensive. This time, perhaps he had really offended her. He could only hope that she would not hold a grudge. Otherwise, as long as she had the slightest intention of finding trouble with him, he believed that his master would be very happy to teach him a lesson to please her. His heart was so tired. He was clearly taking the blame for his master, but he did not get any benefits. Then, we will leave first. They stepped forward to help and Jiu helped Li Hongyuan up. Wait. Jingwan called out to them. Miss, what else do you want? Who can do me a favor and cross off this mark? Let others think that I was scratched by a broken branch when I fell from above. Jingwan did not avoid touching her neck. As soon as these words came out, these shadow guards felt that their surroundings seemed to have become a lot colder. Their backs felt cold and they resisted the urge to look at their master. What, is it very difficult? I don't know the severity of the matter and am worried that I will hurt my blood vessels if I use too much force. If it's you guys, you should be able to cover the mark without hurting it too much. The meaning behind her words was that even if they did not do it, she would do it herself. This problem was even more of a headache than the first one. Looking at their awkward and evasive gazes, Jingwan said, I thought that you guys were used to this kind of mark and didn't find it strange. But in fact, when you came in, didn't you already see it? And your expressions were very certain who did it. But now, you're so shy that you don't look like a man at all. Jingwan didn't hold back and stabbed Li Hongyuan first, then stabbed the group of secret guards until they were drenched in blood. Great Aunt, I'm really wronged. They definitely have never seen these things. Also, please don't talk nonsense, it will kill people. It's completely because your bite mark is too obvious that we saw it at a glance. We definitely did not pry on purpose. It's not that we're not like men, it's that you're more valiant and bold than men. Master, the future princess consort's fighting strength is too terrifying. we subordinates can't handle it. Stop pretending, those romantic affairs are all sins that you created. Don't ask us subordinates to take the wind and rain when things come to a head. You can hide for a while, but you can't hide forever. When the princess consort marries you and comes to settle the score behind closed doors, we subordinates can't help you. Li Hongyuan was very indifferent to Jingwan's words. He planned it himself, so there was nothing that he couldn't bear. He couldn't wait for Jingwan to settle the score with him. The more she cared about these things, the more she cared about him. He was just unhappy that Jingwan wanted to erase the marks he left behind. Although he wasn't sober at that time and didn't have a good taste of Wan's blood, when he was sober, he couldn't bear to hurt her. But now, he didn't regret it. Compared to a long period of time when she had to hide it and might be discovered by others, it was indeed more convenient to just erase it directly. Even if she didn't experience ups and downs, Wan was decisive and resolute in her bones. This kind of thing wouldn't cause harm to others, and she only needed to leave a scar as the price to put an end to many troublesome things. She didn't need to think about what she would do. As for this group of insensible people, the future mistress's neck should be looked at indiscriminately. She had to wash their eyes properly when they went back. Erasing the bite mark was a foregone conclusion. Li Hongyuan naturally couldn't let her do it by herself, so he secretly touched Enjo. Enjo, who got the hint, was not surprised. He was the most suitable person to do this kind of thing, but every time his master thought of it in the future, he was afraid that he would remember it. He wouldn't remember that he was the one who gave the order now. Enjo accepted it very calmly. I'll do it. I think I know a lot about external injuries. What do you think, Miss Luo? Jingwan nodded. It didn't matter who did it. It would definitely be better than her. And Jill broke the branch and walked to Jingwan. Now she inexplicably felt that she was much more dazzling than before when she was in a coma. She didn't shrink back when she encountered difficulties. She faced difficulties head-on. She did things and spoke neatly without hesitation. She wasn't arrogant, but one could feel her pride. Everything she showed was far beyond the calmness and wisdom of her age. She was very similar to his master who was mature many years ago. At this moment, Enjo seemed to suddenly understand a little of the reason why his master was so obsessed with her. Indeed, only such a woman was the most suitable for his master. Because when something happened, she would not only not be a hindrance, but could even preside over the overall situation when his master was not there. It needs to be realistic. The wound may be a little long, but it only needs to be covered up on the surface. After all, even a master of external injuries will not carefully check the wound on your neck. Jingwan frowned slightly. Make it deeper. I don't want to cover it up for a while, but for a lifetime. The fake surface wound is too shallow. After healing and removing the scab, the imprint inside is as clear as before. Then what I'm doing now is just suffering in vain. And Joe was speechless. After looking carefully, he found that his master's bite was not ordinary ruthless. Even the best medicine to remove scars could not disappear. Probably he really wanted to accompany her for a lifetime. To completely cover it up, the scar left behind might be bigger. Did his master regret it? It will be very painful. If Miss Luo can't bear it, if I were you, it's already over. Don't you know that the more you hesitate, the greater the impact it will have on the other party? Jingwan said, tilting her neck and silently urging. And Joe's hands inexplicably trembled. He didn't have this reaction when he was treating his master's wound. Jingwan smiled at him comfortingly and even joked, "Steady, otherwise my life will really be lost in your hands." Sure enough, the more he said, the greater the impact on the other party. He really deeply felt it, and the feeling of being on the back. He could be sure that his master was staring at him. "Great aunt, please don't laugh. Master's vinegar jar is about to overturn. Originally, he had already held a grudge against you for making a move. After it was over, he'd better ask to train for a period of time. If you're like this, perhaps it's better for me to do it myself. Jingwan still smiled. Swish swish, Jingwan felt an obvious pain, but her heart felt a lot more relaxed. In this place where women were extremely harsh, such a bite mark, not to mention an unmarried girl, even a married woman would attract gossip. Those who thought that they were noble and cultured, once they saw this kind of thing, would spit out the most vicious, cruel, and unkind words. Because they themselves were deeply bound, they couldn't tolerate anyone being different from them. In the eyes of others, Jingwan didn't even frown. She just covered it with her handkerchief. But then she thought of something and loosened it, letting the blood stain her collar. Not to mention that Li Hongyuan saw the blood on Jingwan's neck, his eyes became more and more dangerous. Even Jiao frowned in disapproval, Miss Luo. Jingwan didn't care and waved her hand. I fainted when I fell down. If there's no blood on my clothes, how can it be justified? I'll deal with it later. Master refused to treat the wound, and now she refused his advice. The purpose was to succeed in the disguise. On this point, the two seemed to have a tacit understanding. The difference was that Miss Luo was doing it for others, while Master was doing it for himself. Comparing the two, it seemed that Miss Luo was more open-minded and selfless, while Master was selfish and narrow-minded. And Jiao handed her a bottle of medicine. It can make the wound stop bleeding and scab quickly, and it won't leave any traces of powder. Jingwan accepted it without hesitation. After all, it had been so long, there must be a difference in the wound. Thank you. Let's go, the people looking for Miss Luo should be arriving soon. Yi reminded. Jingwan also nodded. Although there was a big difference between people who practice martial arts and those who didn't, in Jingwan's view, people who practice martial arts couldn't reach the level of mystical martial arts novels in her previous life. Relying on a pair of feet, they could travel 1,000 li a day and so on. It was absolutely a fantasy. If the time of their accident and the time of Jin Qinhuang's assassination wasn't too long, then the people looking for her shouldn't be too far away. When they were preparing to leave, Jiao suddenly opened his mouth and asked, Miss hasn't seen us before, yet you're so assured to hand Wang Ye over to us? After all, according to common sense, the people looking for Wang Ye wouldn't be just a group of people. It could also be those assassins, right? Jingwan looked at him with surprise. Allow me to be impolite, but are you saying that I'm stupid, or are you saying that you're stupid? If it was an assassin who broke in and saw the sleeping Jin Qinhuang, plus an unarmed and weak woman, their first reaction would only be to rush forward and kill to silence. Would they still have the leisure to talk so much with me? Moreover, I also don't know where the assassin came from to be so daring. After they might have already succeeded, they still pursued a Qinhuang relentlessly, insisting on confirming his life and death. You guys took so long to find us, presumably Jin Qinhuang also fell from the mountain into the river. Those assassins have either been executed or have already escaped. If there are still so many of you chasing after us, then how incompetent are the people around Jin Qinhuang? Facing Jingwan's scrutinizing gaze, Jiao really felt that he was stupid to the extreme. He should have long understood that she was different from the average woman in the boudoir. It was impossible for her to not be able to see through the crux of the matter, and it was even more impossible for her to lose her ability to think because of fear. Wasn't her performance perfect from beginning to end? He delivered himself to her door to be slapped in the face, TSK. Jiao instructed her to quickly treat the wound on her neck before he somewhat awkwardly went to help help his master up. After that, Jingwan watched them leave and very quickly disappeared into the darkness. She turned around and began to clean the wound. After confirming that Jingwan couldn't see, Li Hongyuan pushed away Yi and Jiao who were supporting him. His posture was ramrod straight. Where was the half-dead look? It was just a typical case of throwing away after using, taking it for granted, without the slightest bit of embarrassment. Stay behind. Yes. How could he really just leave? At the very least, he had to wait until she was picked up by Quan Su and Quan Wei. The people following him were somewhat perturbed, not knowing what he thought of the previous matters. They waited for a long time without seeing his anger, so they could only quietly follow him. The matter that I asked you to investigate, what is the result? Being asked about serious matters, naturally they didn't dare to neglect. Miss Luo came to Bai Long Temple in advance. The people left in Luo Fu to send a pigeon, but we didn't receive any news. It has been confirmed that the pigeon is missing, but that letter didn't have any special content. It was covered up as usual, so there shouldn't be any problem. The matter of a wild beast crashing into Elder Ruan's youngest daughter's carriage was an accident. You must find out the whereabouts of the pigeon. Even if it was eaten, you must find the bones for Ben Wang. Carefully investigate everyone around Wan Fangfei, including herself. Yes. Master didn't allow any accidents to happen to Miss Luo, so it was understandable. Even if the bones of the pigeon were eaten by a dog, it would be dug out. Since it was suspected that Wan Fangfei set up a trap herself, then it must be investigated again and again. It didn't matter if she courted death, but if she implicated Miss Luo, then it must not happen. Why did Wan and the others come in advance? Sun Gongzi suggested Miss Sun because he said that he would be very busy in 2 days. He hoped to take advantage of these 2 days to see the flourishing peach blossoms of Bai Long Temple. Miss Sun and Miss Luo talked about it, and Miss Luo agreed, so there was the following matter. Why did Sun Yilin become busy? Wasn't it because Li Hongyuan didn't want him to have time to contact Jingwan? He just didn't want him to be unwilling to let go of these 1 or 2 days of free time. He had to deliberately get closer to Jingwan. After the carriage fell off the cliff, did he regret it? It seems that this prince was too kind to him. The coldness in Li Hongyuan's words made the people around him shiver. Speaking of regret, Li Hongyuan also had a little. In his previous life, Wan didn't suffer such a crime. Everything changed because of his actions. However, he was never a person who regretted, and he wouldn't stop changing the things he wanted to change because of this accident. He would only think about how to protect Jingwan more carefully. What's going on with Fu Yunting? Heir Wuanho brought his wife to Bai Long Temple to burn incense and return a vow. When they were leaving the city, they met Miss Luo and the others. After knowing each other's purpose, they went together. This prince had someone act as a matchmaker for him, and also gave him money. Because he was allowed to take a leave of absence for the wedding, he really enjoyed it. He sighed silently. Heir Fu was on his own. Master, there's one more thing. Nanny Gong said that after Miss Luo fell off the cliff, Heir Wuanho helped Miss Luo and saved her from the danger of losing her life. Aside from the fact that he had to report all the big and small things related to Miss Luo, his original intention was that his master would treat Heir Fu better on account of him saving Miss Luo, but he didn't expect that. Hearing this, Li Hongyuan suddenly stopped in his tracks. Originally, he didn't reveal much of his emotions, but in an instant, the sinister murderous intent almost solidified. Fu Yunting, perhaps this prince should directly chop you up and feed you to the dogs, so as to completely eliminate all future troubles. The shadow guards couldn't help but retreat in horror. They felt that if Heir Fu was in front of their master would really do as he said. This reaction was completely wrong. If they still couldn't guess that there was some kind of relationship between Heir Fu and Miss Luo, they could go and knock their heads against a wall. According to their master's extreme possessiveness towards Miss Luo, if any other man got close to her, he would definitely get jealous and keep them far away, secretly causing a lot of trouble for them. However, even Chen Jingmin, who was about to become Miss Luo's fiancé, didn't cause their master to have such a strong reaction. Since it was Fu Yunting who stepped on their master's sore spot, then no matter what kind of abyss of suffering he had in the future, they wouldn't dare to sympathize with him anymore. When Nanny Gong specially mentioned this matter, it wasn't that she didn't want to repay Li Hongyuan a little because she couldn't tolerate his actions anymore. However, she probably didn't expect that she would directly stab Li Hongyuan's Achilles heel, causing Fu Yunting to almost lose his life. The most wronged person was none other than Fu Yunting. He didn't know anything. Even on the road from the entrance of the capital to Bailong Temple, he didn't meet Jingwan face to face. His new wife was talking to old Madame Luo at the back, while he, Sun Yilin, and Luo Jingbo were riding in front. He just happened to be in the position closest to the cliff. Chapter 74. This time, except for Jingwan, it took them 4 to 6 hours to rescue the others from the cliff. The main reason was that the terrain was too dangerous. Even if they used ropes to drop people down to save them, it was difficult to find a place to land. It was all thanks to the many monks of White Dragon Temple. Their lower bodies were solid and their strength was great enough. It could be said that they directly paved a human ladder. If it were other servants, they would have become weak before they could get down. In addition, Jingwan's carriage was at the outermost, sandwiched between 2 trees. The horse was hanging in midair. When all the people who were thrown out of the carriage were rescued, the horse had been hanged alive. If that was all, it would not be a big deal. However, Yuan Qiao and Zhou Yingshuang were still in the carriage. After such a long time, the roots of the 2 trees had been turned over from the soil. Even if the carriage was on the verge of collapse, the 2 of them shrank as much as possible to the back of the carriage. Their hands were tightly gripping the window. Even if their nails were bleeding, their fingers were numb, and their consciousness was getting worse, they did not dare to move. They were afraid that they would fall down. They did not know why they were still holding on. In this way, they could not directly cut the rope of the horse. Jingwan was still below. They did not know her exact position. If they let the horse fall, what if it hit her? Some people wanted to say that since it was confirmed that she fell on the bottom of the river, how could there be a chance of survival? But when she saw Madame Luo's tense face, she didn't dare to say it out loud. In the beginning, someone had only muttered a few words, but she had heard it from far away. She looked at the amiable old woman with a fierce gaze, as if she wanted to devour someone. And it was definitely not only Madame Luo who cared about Jingwan's safety. Even the most obedient cat would show its sharpest claws after this. Whoever dared to say another word would not have a good ending. Even if White Dragon Temple had already sent monks and Luo family servants down the mountain to find Jingwan, even if the others were rescued, Madame Luo still stood at the edge of the cliff and refused to leave. Gong Mama did her best to comfort old Madame Luo, telling her that Miss was blessed by the heavens and that nothing would happen to her. However, these words were useless and powerless at the moment. Nanny Gong was such a strict person that she would never criticize others in her heart. When she stood beside Madame Luo, she cursed Li Hongyuan fiercely in her heart. That bastard had always done whatever he wanted without considering the feelings of others. At that moment, Nanny Gong even had the impulse to tell Jingwan everything so that she could see his true colors. In the end, it was Great Master Liaochen who arrived late and personally assured old Madame Luo that third Miss Luo's life was not in danger. When others said that Jingwan had no chance of survival, old Madame Luo was so angry that her eyes turned red and she didn't believe them. But when Master Liaochen said this, she was still suspicious. In fact, she also faintly felt that her most beloved granddaughter was gone. After all, she was so tall, how much good fortune did she have to be to let her escape death? Because of this, she suspected Master Liaochen as well. Amitabha, Master Liaochen said, there are no signs in old madam's life that the white-haired person will have to send off the black-haired person. Therefore, old madam, you can rest assured. This was a blessing in disguise for old Madame Luo. Master Liaochen had 3 divinations every year, but in fact, he had already divined 2 out of the 3. Somehow, he felt that the 3rd destined person was about to appear. However, in order to comfort old Madame Luo, he was not stingy. Therefore, when Master Liaochen said that there was a destined person, it was not certain. He was always merciful, not inflexible at all. Old Madame Luo was startled. Only then did she remember Master Liaochen's reputation. For decades, his predictions had never been wrong. She finally showed a look of surprise. Thank you, Master Liaochen. Thank you, Master Liaochen. Other than anything else, she would definitely add a large sum of money to the White Dragon Temple. Hearing this, the others breathed a sigh of relief. As for whether her injuries would be serious. When people were in desperate straits, a little bit of comfort was enough. At this time, their thoughts were almost the same as Jingwan's. As long as she was alive, there was hope. If something really happened, the Luo family would be able to support her for the rest of her life. Fu Yunting was the only one who didn't even have a scratch on his skin after falling off the cliff. He had helped save people before, and now he finally relaxed his clenched fists. He also felt a little less guilty. In fact, he had been blaming himself. If it wasn't for him, perhaps the Luo family's 3rd daughter wouldn't have. The most regretful and distressed person was Sun Yilin. The situation of the woman he had fallen in love with was unknown, and his younger sister was seriously injured and unconscious. Most importantly, her face was injured. Such a deep and long cut, from the bottom of her earlobe to the corner of her mouth. If it was a little deeper and a little longer, it would have directly torn open the corner of her mouth. How terrible would that be? No matter how good the medicine was, it would be impossible for her to recover to her original state. Even if he just hoped that her face could be smoother, it would be very difficult. His younger sister could be considered as completely disfigured. He didn't need to say how important a woman's face was, especially in a family like theirs. His younger sister's marriage hadn't been decided yet. Without that face, there would be no value in a marriage alliance. It was conceivable that his father would not hesitate to give up his younger sister and support the concubine's younger sister. A woman who fell from the clouds into the mud would only receive more ridicule, humiliation, and trampling. Not to mention his concubine's younger sisters, who had always been at odds with his younger sister and were jealous of her. If they were allowed to gain power, his younger sister's fate was unimaginable. Jingwan being able to survive was naturally a blessing in disguise. However, this matter was far from over. Sun Yijia was the only legitimate daughter of Duke Ding, and Ruan Fangfei was the youngest legitimate daughter of the Grand Secretary of the Cabinet. Both of them were unmarried, and their value was far greater than their own. Because of Sun Yijia's disfigurement, she suddenly turned from a treasure to a broken piece of debris. Not to mention what would happen to Ruan Ruizhong, Duke Ding was bound to ask for an explanation. The so-called explanation, to put it bluntly, was to ask for benefits. Among the people involved in this matter, the one who could benefit the most from it was Ruan Ruizhong and Master Liaochen. The former was not easy to deal with, and his daughter had also been harmed. In addition, the cause of the accident was not Ruan Fangfei, so it would be difficult to extract benefits from him. The latter, on the other hand, was more valuable. If he could exchange Master Liaochen for a chance to defy the heavens and change his fate, Duke Ding wouldn't feel bad even if he lost all of his daughters, let alone one. Everyone knew what kind of person Master Liaochen was. Logically speaking, when such a big thing happened, he should have been the first to appear. If he came late, it could only mean that he had other important matters to attend to. The monks of White Dragon Temple wouldn't delay the rescue because of this, so naturally, no one could blame him. As for the beast that caused the trouble, they couldn't pin the crime of lax discipline on him just because he was in White Dragon Temple's territory. No one knew that an even more serious matter had happened on this mountain. Madame Luo and the others were anxiously waiting for Jingwan's return. As soon as the incident happened, each family had sent the news back to the capital as quickly as possible. The first person to know about everything here was naturally Li Hongyuan's father, Lu Qingdi. It could be imagined how angry he was when he learned about this matter. His son had been chased away by him for less than a day, and something had happened to him. He was besieged, fell off a cliff, fell into a river, and his life and death was unknown. So much so that he neglected the matter of Jingwan and the others falling off the cliff. At that time, Lu Qingdi had already finished dealing with political affairs and was drinking wine and enjoying the dance in the inner palace with beauties in his arms. When he heard the news, he smashed everything in front of him and the beauties around him were also chased out. Therefore, in less than a quarter of an hour, the entire inner palace knew about the assassination of Jin Qinhuang. Once the inner palace knew, the court naturally also knew about it very quickly. The matter of the flower market hadn't been cleared up yet, and here there was an even more serious disaster. Moreover, Jin Qinhuang had just arrived at Bailong Temple and was assassinated. It was hard not to link these two matters together. Thinking about the reason why Jin Qinhuang was punished, was it also a part of it? Was it someone who deliberately schemed against him? If this was really planned by someone early on, there would always be an illusion that there was an invisible big hand controlling the overall situation. It seemed that something really bad was going to happen. And the most prominent princes were all guessing, who was the one who did it this time, and what was the reason for it. Although they all hated Li Hongyuan to death and almost every day cursed him to go to the 18 layers of hell, Li Hongyuan didn't have any conflict of interest with them. No matter how hateful he was, they couldn't deal with him. With Fu Wang's protection, if they made a move against him, wouldn't that be courting death? They were just waiting for him to make a mistake and then be tidied up by Fu Wang. Otherwise, they would just keep waiting until they were on the throne to tidy him up. This was something that everyone knew, but someone actually did it. Then the purpose was very obvious: to shift the blame. The several princes couldn't help but tense up. This matter wasn't done by them, so the person who did this wanted to deal with them, wouldn't it be them? If the other party wanted to shift the blame onto them, then it was necessary to create evidence that was unfavorable to them. If there were no loopholes around them, then the so-called shift wouldn't succeed. But with this kind of deliberate planning, could it be that they were confident? As soon as they thought that there must be a problem with one of the links in their hands that they didn't know about, fear and anger intertwined. Investigate, they must investigate clearly. At the same time, Bailong Temple also had to send people to investigate. Although they knew that it was a foolish act to act at this time, there was no news coming back from there. If they couldn't grasp some accurate information, they would be very passive. This wasn't like the flower market, where they could just give up and clean up the mess. If they didn't do anything and waited for the pot of shit to fall on their heads, then this battle for the throne could be withdrawn in advance. As his mother, Imperial concubine Su rushed to Lu Qingdi's place in an attempt to get more information. Imperial concubine Su didn't wail, and didn't even shed a tear. But her forbearance, restlessness, and panic were all seen by Lu Qingdi. "My dear concubine, don't worry. It's said that scourges live for 1,000 years. That evil creature is the scourge of scourges. It won't be so easy for something to happen to him. Your Majesty, how can you talk about your own son like that?" Imperial concubine Su glared at him. Okay, I said something wrong. That's my son, the son of the dragon. Naturally, he will be protected by the heavens. Naturally, he will turn misfortune into good fortune and misfortune into good fortune. Imperial concubine Su softly hummed and wiped the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. Although Yuan has a bad temper, he is the most filial. When he heard that this concubine missed the vegetarian food in Bai Long Temple, he sent someone to quickly send it back at noon. He has always been spoiled. Although this concubine didn't say it, I was afraid that he would suffer. But. Imperial concubine Su's voice was a little choked. It's all this concubine's fault. If I didn't send Yuan to Bai Long Temple, perhaps this wouldn't have happened. Why couldn't I pray for blessings? Why did I have to send him to Bai Long Temple? If elder sister were to find out, she would definitely blame me. Perhaps it was because she was too emotional, but Imperial consort Su spoke without thinking. Lu Qingdi's expression changed. No, Yuan will be fine. If something happens to him, this concubine will definitely make the person behind the scenes regret walking in this world. Imperial concubine Su felt his coldness and killing intent and couldn't help but feel a little frightened. She knew very well that Lu Qingdi might not have thought of passing the throne to Yuan but Yuan's position in his heart was definitely the most special among all the princes. He was so special that he was irreplaceable. He was so special that he would give up his favorite prince because of him. Lu Qingdi's reaction was a little slower, but he also had some connections that the ministers could think of. It was also at this time that Lu Qingdi's personal attendant returned. Your Majesty, this servant has asked. Imperial concubine Su looked at Lu Qingdi with some confusion. In fact, she was also asking him if she should leave. Lu Qingdi looked at her comfortingly. Speak. Chen Gengyi said that before she entered the palace, she was already not a virgin. That Mama Gong who examined her body had connections with her maiden family and helped her hide it. She didn't want this matter to be known by someone and secretly threatened her. A few days ago, she even told her that because she entered the palace and was favored, her maiden family became arrogant and domineering. They accepted bribes, forcibly occupied fertile land, and killed people. Each and every crime is unforgivable. If Qin Gengyi doesn't listen, she will bring the matter of her maiden family to His Majesty. Last night, she received a message from that side, telling her to seduce Qin Wang. After the matter is completed, not only will they help her keep the secret, but they will also prove her innocence in front of His Majesty. They will also help her clean up the matter of her maiden family and ignore any future troubles. That personal attendant lowered his head and answered truthfully, not daring to hide anything. Imperial concubine Su was very surprised. Perhaps she thought that Lu Qingdi was right next to her and was afraid of hurting his face. She hurriedly covered her mouth with a handkerchief to hide her expression. Beloved concubine doesn't need to cover it up. Zhen is also very surprised. Lu Qingdi said indifferently. Relatively speaking, Lu Qingdi's temper was relatively good. These past few years, when he lost his temper, 7 out of 10 times, it was because of Li Hongyuan. Almost every time, he would fly into a rage. But when he was truly furious, he was actually very calm. Every time he was like this, it meant that the consequences of the matter would be very serious. The angriest and calmest time was when he strangled her to death with his own hands, even for someone like Imperial concubine Su. At this time, her heart was beating faster and faster. The so-called thunder and rain were the grace of the monarch. This sentence was not false at all. No matter how many tricks you used, no matter how much honor and favor you were, one sentence from him could make you lose everything. When you couldn't hold him in the palm of your hand, you were destined to be controlled by him. Don't blame Imperial concubine Su for being the most favored in the harem for more than 20 years and still being afraid of him. Also, don't blame so many people for wanting his throne. Take all the palace servants around Qin Gengyi into custody. Gather all the palace concubines and palace servants in the harem to watch them being interrogated. Those who don't speak will be beaten to death. Beloved concubine, go take a look too. He gently patted Imperial concubine Su's shoulder. Imperial concubine Su's hands and feet were ice-cold. Her hands and feet were stiff like a puppet as she bowed and left. Those who don't speak will be beaten to death. Let's not talk about whether Chungingi's palace maids knew about her and whether they were the ones who helped the mastermind to threaten Chungingi. If they couldn't say anything, they would die. If they didn't know and said something, they would still die. If they really were a spy, they would still die. This meant that all the palace servants who previously served Chungingi will be beaten to death. Luqingdi was killing the chicken to warn the monkey. He was using this method to tell everyone in the harem that he was the true master of the harem. If they wanted to cause trouble under his watch, they had to be prepared to be severely punished. Chungingi was not a virgin before entering the palace. As the monarch, he was deceived. In addition, she seduced his son. As the saying goes, deceiving the monarch first and intending to wear a green hat later, Luqingdi had eyes but failed to see and pampered her for several months. It could be said that this made him lose all face. This kind of thing should have been tightly covered up, but Luqingdi did the opposite. It could be said that he was announcing it to the harem. With such an open cover, how many courtiers would not know? An emperor who didn't even care about his own face, then what exactly did he want to do? It was terrifying to think about. Perhaps because he had vented some of his anger, Luqingdi's mood calmed down a lot. He firmly believed that his evil son would not die so easily. Finally, he seemed to remember that there seemed to be another matter. He took the letter again and read it carefully. The letter was concise and to the point. It only explained the cause of the incident and the people who fell off the cliff. The situation of those people was still unknown. It seemed that the next letter would be after the result of the incident. Luqingdi frowned. He was not sure whether the two things were related. After all, it was a sudden accident on the other side. His son was assassinated here. He had reason to suspect that the killers deliberately created chaos to lure the monks of White Dragon Temple away. Without the help of the monks of White Dragon Temple, it would be easier to assassinate his son. If this was really the case, then the whole thing would become more complicated and troublesome. If it was just a coincidence, then it wouldn't be much less troublesome. Some people might try to link the two things together. After all, it was easier to fish in muddy water. In this way, Luqingdi had to consider the worst case. None of the old foxes in the imperial court were easy to deal with. Luqingdi had a headache. These bastards couldn't stop. He secretly made up his mind that he would punish the mastermind severely once he caught him. After thinking about it, he still couldn't come up with a good result. Therefore, without saying anything, he summoned all the elders of the people involved in the letter to the palace. It seemed that they had already known about it. Of course, the elders of Fu Yunting were excluded. Only he, who was paralyzed in bed, was not dead, probably because of his nephew's marriage. He was not dead, but just like a living dead. Luqingdi directly threw the trouble to them. He said very straightforwardly, "What do you want? Tell me. I will try my best to satisfy you. If your request is too excessive, get out of my way. Anyway, it has nothing to do with me." Although he said it euphemistically, Luqingdi clearly meant this. Yuan Chaoqiao and Zhou Shuang's father were a little flattered and didn't know what to say for a while. Perhaps because his father-in-law, Luo Peishan, was here, Yuan Chaoqiao's father wanted to follow his lead. However, Luo Peishan had his back to him. It was not convenient for him to speak, so he could only keep silent. Although Wan Ruizhong looked calm, there was unspeakable worry in his eyes. He took the initiative to say, "Your Majesty, no matter what happens to my daughter, it is her own fate. This matter has nothing to do with your Majesty. It is my honor to receive your Majesty's favor. It is my daughter's honor. I dare not ask for anything more from your Majesty." That was why people said that the Grand Secretary of the Cabinet was extraordinary. Hearing these words, Luqingdi felt that it was ironic. Compared with Luqingdi, Duke Ding was not very happy. He cursed twice fiercely. You know how to pretend to be a good person. Your Majesty, the specific situation is still unknown. It is better to wait until it is clear. He didn't care about Sun Yijia's safety, but he didn't know the specific situation. It was not good for him to speak. If she died, naturally, he could get the most benefits. She was his favorite, not his treasure. If she was seriously injured, it would be best if the Emperor could solve her future for her. If she was lucky and only suffered minor injuries, then it would be best to make it as serious as possible. In short, the abacus in his heart was crackling. Aiqing Luo, what do you think? Luqingdi saw that Luo Peishan was silent, so he asked. Your Majesty, this subject believes that this subject's granddaughter will be safe and sound. Therefore, this subject has no request. Luqingdi looked at him and was quite surprised. Luo Peishan usually didn't speak like this. However, looking at his appearance, he really didn't mean what he said. However, didn't this mean that he really valued his family's younger generation? Only if he truly cared would he wholeheartedly hope for her safety and not ask for anything else. Okay, I got it. As for the other two people, Luqingdi was too lazy to pay attention to them. They were purely going through the motions. At worst, they would be rewarded after the event. This was already the most benevolent thing they could do. If it were any other time, Luqingdi wouldn't care even if a few more people in his family died. After the people were rescued, the families naturally sent letters to him. Luqingdi was the only one who had not received any news from his evil spawn. The waiting process was always worrying. The longer it went on, the more impatient he became. The servants who served him were punished one after another because of some trivial things that no one would care about. At first, it was only 10 strokes of the cane. Then, it increased to 20, 50, and finally, they did nothing. Even if they just knelt on one side, he would vent his anger on them and beat them to death directly. Even the closest ones were not unscathed. Tomorrow, at least half of the servants in his palace would be replaced. Naturally, the imperial concubines were paying attention to Luqingdi's situation. They kept quiet out of fear and couldn't help but hope that Li Hongyuan was fine. No matter how much he was hated, as long as he was not provoked, he would not stir up trouble in his father's harem. However, Luqingdi's anger was different. If something went wrong, they would be implicated. If Luqingdi, who didn't sleep all night, knew that his son's life was not in danger and he was sleeping in a tender place all night, would he be so angry that he would vomit blood and die? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.